Well, it's a new year and we all have New Year's resolutions, but how do we actually make those resolutions and those goals and dreams and things that we write down actually come true? And today's guest, Keita Demming, who actually wrote the book Strategy into Action, is going to help us do just that. Hi, I'm Chris Reynolds, and I'm on a mission to help independent financial advisors build a better business through a remarkable client experience. In this podcast, you're going to learn how to do that from my conversations with the visionaries, the leaders, the independent advisors who are reshaping the future of the financial advice industry. At the end of each episode, you're going to walk away with an actionable idea that you can take and use right now, and it will help you to build a better business today. This is Turning the Page. Well, it's a new year. The next 12 months are a blank canvas that we can turn into something amazing for both our business and our life. They call it a New Year's resolution. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of talk right now about goals, visions, plans for what we want to accomplish in the new year. But by the end of Q1, so often we feel we didn't take as much action as we wanted to. And sometimes we don't accomplish everything that we set out to in our New Year's resolution. And I'm sure everyone's experienced this, including myself. So how do we effectively turn strategy into action? How can we do this well and drive growth in our business, drive growth for our clients, and drive growth in our lives? And how do we make those big plans actually happen? So to kick off the new year, we have our guest today is an expert on this particular field, and he's literally written the book on it. We have Keita Demming, and he is an author, trusted advisor, thought leader in design, strategy, innovation. He strongly believes that the more we learn from others, the more likely we are to find our journey easier. His clients describe him as helping people become better business people and better people in business. His book, Strategy to Action, which is what we're talking about here, and this is the great timely episode, is described as a practical methodology that will turn your biggest ideas into real offerings in both your business and your life. He's an award-winning educator. He's a coach. He's worked to transform companies and spaces from idea-driven to people-centered. And this comes from what he sent me. He's a high school dropout turned PhD. I'm sure we're going to dig into that. And he now uses education and coaching to help his clients thrive. So welcome to the show, Keita.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Because of the timing of the year and all of that, I just want to highlight one thing. So if you look at the research, 20% of people are successful with their New Year's resolution goals. So instead of looking at the 80% of people who don't meet their goals, let's look at the 20% who meet their goals, right? So for that 20%, what they often do is they have a plan that goes along with their goals. So most of us, what we do, which is also part of the essence of my book, Strategy to Action, is people make a big audacious plan, put it out, put it out there. I'm going to accomplish X.
Right, whatever.
So let's say I'm going to run a 10K marathon. Until you say, hey, I'm going to run 3 times a week, and I'm going to run in this particular race, and I'm going to train 1 kilometer in the first 2 weeks, 2 kilometers in the next 3 weeks, blah, 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 and build that out. It's a wish. It's a dream.
Right.
It's something you want to do. So the piece around us, the general idea is to take that big idea from a dream into a plan. And that's how you improve. That's how you join that 20% of people who actually fulfill their New Year's resolutions every year. So not everybody fails. 20% of people succeed, and you just want to be part of that 20% who succeed.
I like it. And as I go back to the Pareto principle, where the 80-20, right? It's always the same, right? It's the 20% accomplish everything, and the 80 sit around thinking about how did that happen. So that is a great way to kick off the show. Let's look at the successes. Let's ask everybody, how are you going to be the 20%, not the 80% going into this new year? I'm very excited again about your story and how you got to this particular position in your life, and what sort of motivated you to get here.
So interestingly, I kind of stumbled through or fumbled through into a career that I stand in front of you here. I've been like a youth worker at one point. I worked with kids who had drugs. I worked at a university doing organizational change stuff. I worked at a think tank at one point. I worked at a university at another point. After I did my master's, we implemented a program around social innovation, and then etc. I've been an entrepreneur in different ways. So I think my first sort of business I ever created was I lived in Trinidad and grew up in Trinidad.
Ah,
And I used to bring in all the soccer gear that people could ship into the island, and I'd sell it to all my friends. So that was one business I had.
that was business one.
That was one business I had. I did all kinds of things. So and I think one of the things that happened to me is that I didn't do well in school, but it was clear that I was bright, etc. But once I got to university, I really thrived. I really did well after that. And I was always considered an athlete and all of that. And in writing this book, the biggest epiphany I've had is that I've come from a lineage of people who've made a career through education. So the biggest example of that is my grandmother, who was a teacher, good old-fashioned teacher, and then became a principal. She moved from Trinidad to England, became principal in England, moved back to Trinidad, and they asked her to be the principal of an all-girls private school at the time, a religious private school.
Right.
And the bishop said to her, we need to close down the school because we don't have enough money. And she looked at him and said, you are not closing an all-girls school in the year of International Women under my watch. And then she went out and found funding from the government, etc., and kept that school open.
Wow.
And that school today still exists. One of the buildings is named after her because she believed that education was transformative for young women on the island to transform their lives. And countless women, girls and women have gone through that school and their lives have been transformed. My dad was in education in one way, my mom, etc. So I've realized that my lineage is that we really believe that education can transform the way people live. So I guess that's a bit of my story, and my life was transformed by education as well. So going from being a high school dropout and then having that one teacher who said, hey, you're a smart guy, but you get bored. So don't do psychology, do an interdisciplinary degree called cognitive systems, which today will be AI.
Right.
And it's a mix of like psychology, philosophy, linguistics, and computer science. So that was my undergraduate degree. Was just, he said, that way you'll never get bored. You're always doing 4 different subjects. And it was hard, but I got really great grades from that. So, and I was one person realizing my potential and investing time and energy into me. And then I was able to go on to do a master's and a PhD and have a scholarship to do my PhD, etc. So that's a little bit about my story.
Well, that makes sense. Now I understand that part in your biography, and I completely agree with you. And how somebody can have a big effect on your life. And in fact, you talked about your grandmother. I use my grandmother as example, and gave me the saying that I certainly appreciate to this day, and then certainly give it to my nieces, nephews, kids. Is the one thing that no one can take away from you is education. They can take everything from you, but they can't take education. So, reading, improving yourself, just like you said, staying current, that's critical to success. So how do you, both with your book and how your business and what you do, how do you help people become better business people and better people in life? Like what's your sort of methodology? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so like most things, the first thing we do is a baseline assessment kind of thing. And this is the boring stuff of it. So we do like a baseline assessment. We look at where you are and talk about where you want to go. And some of that's goal setting. What we talked about at the top of the hour, we help you join the 20% who are successful.
Right.
And we use a very specific personality assessment tool called DNA behavior. It looks at what are your natural behaviors, and then we jump from there. Here's the thing that I want to premise that makes us different.
Right.
I want to just, before I say what I'm about to say, I want to say mindset is absolutely important. Mindset is absolutely transformative. But everybody believes that mindset is where it's all at. So I need to change my mindset and I'll change my life, which is in some ways true. It's hard to argue that. But changing a mindset is really hard. So I want you to imagine the iceberg. So you would have seen any psychology textbook, you'll see an iceberg, and it talks about event at the top, and then you have beliefs and ideas and whatever underneath. And then you have habits, practices, routines, etc.
Right.
If you have a belief, let's say you have something like people pleasing is your thing. That's your belief. That's the thing that's blocking you. it's going to take a long time and basically therapy for you to stop being a people pleaser.
Right.
So to focus on the mindset piece is one of the hardest routes to go, which is different from perspective. So a perspective shift is you're looking at something in this particular way, right?
Right.
So a typical example in my work is that most people think of a funnel, sales funnel, as you get leads on the top and they fall through the bottom.
Right.
A perspective change, what we do is we say, there's no such thing. It's an inverted funnel. There's no gravity working for you. You have to drive people up the funnel. That's a
that's a good perspective
change.
I like that. Yeah.
That's a perspective change. It's not a mindset change. So
Right.
your mindset as somebody who wants to be successful, who wants to build a business, that's the same. But just change your perspective around how you think about sales. So how we are different is that we focus on the low-hanging fruit, which is instead of we work on mindset, but that's more of a longer game kind of thing. But what we're doing is like, what are the quick wins we can get with you as a client? And that is always designing systems and processes, designing the environment, and changing your perspective on a couple of things. And then you begin to work in a very different way because now you have a new lens. Now you've put systems and processes in place that make sure you're working on the right things and the right tools. So that's one of the approaches that we take. And I think it's quite different from what mainstream will tell you.
Yeah, well, just that one little tip there, I think that makes a huge amount of sense. We think of that sales tunnel you just described, but really it should be, moving it up because each tier is an effort and an effort that needs to be taken by somebody.
Yeah, you have to create the impetus for the person to move through the next phase. Nobody moves through the next phase of the tunnel because gravity is pulling them.
Right.
But I didn't change your mindset.
Right. Yeah,
I just changed your perspective. Right. And it's different.
I think that's a fantastic example. So let's drill back. We talked about it. It's the New Year's episode. People are doing their resolutions right now. As we talked about, 20% do succeed. So what do those 20 we talked about perspective and everything else. Well, what do those people, how do they make and keep their resolution? So if my audience is listening now and somebody wants to increase their sales, I'm going to buy 25%. What would you ask them to do?
So there are three things that we talk about that I think again separate us, and the book is very much about this. In the book, I introduce you to a framework that helps you think about how do you build your life and then how do you execute dreams that you have for your life. That's basically, there are 4 chapters that talk about that. The first thing that you have to do, so for example, I currently have ACL surgery. So for me to go through this, I have to think about, okay, when am I going to do my first 5K, 10K, all of that kind of thing. The biggest mistake that most people make is they think on too short of a timeline. So I want to lose 25 pounds. People think I want to do that in 6 months. So let's say you do that in 6 months. Let's magically say you do that. Chances are you're going to be back to the same weight you are 18 months later because whatever you did in that six months was not sustainable.
Right.
But if you instead say, you know what, over the next 3 years, I'm going to lose 25 pounds, but I'm going to do it in a way where I change my lifestyle. I change how I am as a human being. So what you've done is you've now extended the timeline and you've said, I want to transform my everyday habits, routines, behaviors, etc., so that I'm the kind of person who is 200 pounds. I'm a heavy guy. So 200 pounds on a regular basis, right? Right. And the way I'm doing that is I'm not thinking to do that in 6 months or a year. I'm thinking about transforming that over 3 years. So the number one thing that you have to do is start to think on a much longer timeline. That's the first thing people do. People need to think on longer, more realistic timelines.
Right. So
for example, if you've grown your business 7% year over year, and this year you set a goal of like, this year we're going to grow our business 25%.
Right.
What do you just set yourself up for failure because you have to do something really, really different to go from 7% to 25%. Versus if you say in 3 years from now, I want to have a company that's growing at a rate of 25% per year. What needs to be true for me to get there over the next 3 years?
Right.
Or 5 years from now, I want to 10x my revenue. What needs to be true so that 10 years from now, I'm making 10 times of what I'm making right now?
Right.
And now I start to think through that. So the first thing you got to do is extend your timeline. What timeline
I
am
like
I
that.
thinking of? Most of us think too close in.
Right.
The second thing you have to do is you have to play an infinite game. So most of us are playing a finite game. We see the pie is small, so we're not sharing enough. We see resources are limited, etc. We have to start playing an infinite game. 1+1 is 5. We have to start using the resources in our network. So a key thing that people often do is they have resources in the ecosystem that they're not maximizing and they're not using. So you have to start to use the resources in your system to the full extent. And that's often relationships. That's often people in your company who are underutilized, who are not working at their full potential, etc. So you have to make sure you're playing that infinite game. Or so, for example, stop this. Stop hiring people for like cheap rates when you want them to do amazing work. Just stop it. Yeah, hire people, pay them well, make sure they're the best, and they will give you the best, and you will get your results. You've just outsourced a whole ton of headache. So play the infinite game.
Infinite game. I love it. Okay.
Play the infinite game. And then the third thing is play your game. So the other piece around that is most of us get caught up in looking at, okay, what is John doing over there? I gotta copy him. Hell no. If you look at, I'm an athlete, I like sports analogies, etc. The time that teams lose is when they stop playing their game.
Right.
They stop playing to their strengths. If you try and play to the other team is playing a fast game and you're best at a defensive game, and you try and play a fast game, you are going to lose. Period. Punto final.
Every single time. Right.
No matter how you thread that needle, you will lose. If your strength is defense and then counterattack, that's your game. You play that. Right. So and people gotta
play your own game.
Play your game. Play your game. So there are lots of ways in which people could do it, but basic thing is get very clear on what your goals are.
Right. So clarity. Yeah.
Clarity around your goals. I want to grow my business 25% in 5 years from now, etc. Prioritize what are the things that will help me get there. Align everything you do in the short term to make sure that everything I do in the short term is in service of that desired future I want.
Right. What you're trying to do.
And then fourth, allocate resources in a way that supports the future that you're building. If you do those 4 things, you are drastically improving the chances of you achieving those big dreams, those big goals, those big results.
Well, even just going through the process of the visualization, and to your point, and doing those things already puts you in a different category than most people who go through their sort of checkbox resolution type of thing. And you've worked with enough people. Where do you see people falling off? Like, these are really, really good tips that you have. Great framework to look at goal setting and resource management, all of those things. But where do you see people fall off? Like, everybody that I know of has a New Year's resolution, but to your point, only 20% actually make it happen. Why do the 80% fall off?
The number one reason that I see in my work that people fall off is that people are motivated by things that are personal, immediate, and certain. We are dissuaded by things that are organized, deferred, and a gamble. Things that are personal.
Good perspective, yeah.
Things that are personally immediate and certain are going for drinks with my friends versus like going to the gym where I won't see results for 1.5 years.
Right.
That's personally immediate.
That's a good example too.
Yeah. Personally immediate and certain. I'm gonna build a prospect list this afternoon instead of meeting up with my boys to go and drink beers or whatever.
Right.
Because at the end of that prospect list, you still haven't made a sale.
Right.
Right. Personally immediate and certain versus organized, deferred, and a gamble. Start doing the things that are organized, deferred, and a gamble. Start doing those things that are more long-term focus than those things that are short-term focused. The reason most people fall off is because they're not willing to pay for the price of the future they want in the short term. So they prefer to pay for a future they don't want, which is going to the bar, not going to the gym, eating that chocolate in front of you, having the ice cream, going to bed at 12 p.m. instead of going to bed at 10 p.m., Like they pay for everything that does not give them the future that they want.
Right.
So the number one fall off, and I'm no joke, I have done this. We did planning sessions, we did a whole strategy plan with his client, etc. And then he said, I know exactly what I need to do, but I've been really wanting to renovate my cottage this year, and I prefer to renovate my cottage this year, and I think I'll do
all
this
these
next
things.
year.
Right.
And I'm like, what is happening right now? Because we just came up with a whole plan that's potentially going to grow your business by 5 times. Next year, you could like build 2 bloody cottages. Like,
Right.
what
You
are we
could build 10
talking about?
cottages. Yeah.
Like, but what is personally immediate is certain is that this summer he wants to be in that like beautiful
Right.
cottage that he's going to renovate, etc. That's personally immediate and certain. So that's where I see most people fall short, is that they're not willing to pay for the future they want right now.
It makes perfect sense. So as we see, one of the hardest things to do is to take strategy, which is theory, and move it into action, which is execution. And this is what I talk to advisors literally about every single day, is how do you take that next big idea and actually make it happen? So if you want to chat about your next big idea and how to turn your strategy into action, just go to the show notes, go to the link, and you can schedule a virtual coffee with me. And I do these virtual coffees all the time. And it's great to really talk about strategy and what you need to do to actually make it come true. Strategy to Action, your book. Tell our audience why they should pick this up and read it, and really what motivated me. I know that it seems your passion and this is what you love to do. Give us a little quick pitch on what people are going to get out of this.
So I'll tell you why I wrote it instead. About a number of years ago, we came up with a framework that our clients end up loving, and it really helped them execute on their business plans, etc.
Right.
And clients have always been saying, hey, where can we read more about this? Where can I love this. It's so helpful. It's so useful. Where can I read more about this? And we hadn't written the book. And then COVID happened. And I was like, you know what? Now's the time to write that book because I got some time.
Right.
Finally. So during COVID, we decided to write that book. I wrote a first draft, got some feedback, wrote a second draft, sent it to an editor. Basically, she made me rewrite the whole book. And now it's coming into the world. And one of the things I think that's been amazing is that before we wrote the book, clients found the concepts and ideas and they're useful.
Right.
Now that we've written the book, the ideas are much sharper, crisper, and have been well sharpened, if that makes sense. So there's clarity that comes with writing that we didn't have before we wrote the book, but yet the framework was useful and our clients loved it. Now, when we bring the work to the clients, they're like, whoa, this is so clear. Like, I love this even more. So our clients are doubling down on using the framework, using the tools and ideas in the books. So the number one thing is that it's been proven before, and we have a whole list of people who are using this every day as it is. So if they are finding it finding benefit from it, chances are you're going to find benefit from it.
Right.
Secondly, the book is short. I deliberately wrote a short book because I wanted to make sure that people
read it and they had the attention span.
Yeah. My idea with this book is if you're flying from New York to California, you should be able to read the book on the flight there and back. That's what I was going for. And then finally, I truly believe that some of the ideas and concepts in this book, if you apply them in your life, if you apply just one or two of them, they can absolutely transform the kinds of goals and objectives that you achieve in the world. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a simple one, which is, I'm an academic, so I come from this academic background.
Right.
And I didn't realize that the stuff I was studying could be so useful. So number one, strategy is a temporary holding position. What I mean by that is, as long as your assumptions in your strategy remain true, it's fine to keep that strategy.
Right.
The second that your strategy changes, you have to start thinking about where you need to change your strategy.
Right.
What I've just done is made you aware of looking out for times when the assumptions that went into your strategy change. So now forever, you're going to look at that, the assumption we had that was baked into our strategy, that just changed. Let's revisit the strategy. versus
Yeah,
people go for 5
I like
years
it.
and they keep the same strategy, and assumptions change, and then they look at their strategy 5 years. It's time for a new strategy plan, and they look at their strategy plan and they're like, this doesn't make any sense because
Right.
you haven't looked at it for 5 years, and all the assumptions that you had have absolutely transformed. Think about anybody who's had a strategy plan in the last 5 years. COVID,
Yeah.
2 wars, etc. It's so much has changed. And I think that's going to keep happening more and more, so that people need an approach to strategy that's responsive, that's quick, that's simple, that they can have on a one-page kind of place that they can think about quickly. They can do a quick 2-hour meeting, 1-hour meeting, and say, hey, this is how we're changing the strategy. Let's go.
Right.
And that's what I think is great about what this book has to offer.
No, that's fantastic. And I think everyone needs this because it's, as I said, anyone can come up with strategy, but it's how do you put it in action? So this is the part of my show where I do what I call a rapid fire. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and it's the first thing that comes into your mind. And the first question, even though I'm pretty sure I already know the answer, is what are you passionate about?
Ooh, what am I passionate about? Transformation.
Transformation. I like it. And so what is, my next question is to you, what is or what was your most memorable client interaction? What's that one time where you're working with somebody and you had the aha, wow, this is happening, this is moving, and you'll always remember it for that sort of aha moment that you had?
So I had the option to write. I'm probably going to write another book,
Right.
and I had to decide whether to write the book I wrote, Strategy to Action, or the way I'm going to start my next book, which is the story I'll tell you. We had a client come in. We were based in Toronto. We had a client come in who was from the US, from a very Republican red state.
Right.
Trump had just won, and we were doing a strategy session with him in the morning. And then we'd done a strategy session with him all day, and then we're going to dinner now. He's like, I want to take you guys to dinner. I love what you did, blah, blah, blah. And when we were walking for dinner, he was saying, I can't wait for Donald Trump to make America great again. And I didn't say anything. I was just like, interesting. So he's talking about how excited he is to have Donald Trump come into power, etc. And I was like, I just have one question for you. What year was America great? And he's like, 1952 is what he said. And my colleague said, 1952, this was the tax rate, blah, 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 and started going off on like all the problems I had in 1950. I'm saying, look, that's not where I'm going with this. I just want to ask you another simple question. I think this is more of an audio podcast, and I think the videos, you could go online to see clips of the videos, but if you haven't noticed, I'm a black male. So it's important for the story.
Right.
So I say to him, I'm a black male. You notice that, and that's obvious to you. He's like, of course. I'm like, so what do you think it was like for somebody like me in 1952?
Right.
Do you think that was still the greatest year when America was the greatest? He's like, I've never thought about that. I was like, so I'll ask you a question again. What year was America great? And he's like, you know what? You really stumped me. Now, he and I went on to have an amazing conversation about US politics and all of this. And right. I never told him whether I was left, right, for Trump, against Trump, or whatever. I just had a conversation with him. And it was the first time I knew it before, because I had started to study conversations and the art of conversations 5 years before this, because I found the world was getting polarized, etc. And I think conversation is the most important thing we have as human beings. So, for example, there are 3 things that separate human beings from all animals in the world: capacity for language, our capacity to set goals, and our capacity to set shared goals. Those 3 things separate us from humans.
Right.
So we have this rich conversation, and I realized we can have these difficult conversations if we know techniques and approaches that help us not have other people's arguments lose force without them losing face.
Right.
So what I did was ask them a question. So there's a woman called Tali Sharrett. She's a researcher, and she talks about people change their minds for 1 of 4 reasons: the data and the original belief, confidence in that original belief, the new data, and their confidence in our new data. So what I did was I got him to question the data of his original belief.
Right.
Without him doing it, I just went and said, so what year was America great?
Right.
He then had to unravel all that stuff without me having to do anything.
Right.
And then we had a beautiful conversation. So what that interaction taught me was that it is possible to have what people think of as difficult conversations without it spiraling into arguments.
Right.
You just need a certain set of skills.
Yeah.
And another thing, I don't think there's anything such as difficult conversations.
Right.
I think there are shallow conversations and there are deep conversations. And I think deep conversations are difficult. And that's a distinction.
I like it. And it's memorable. It's something, and I'm glad that'll probably be your first chapter in the next book. So
it is going to be.
It. Yeah, I love it.
But that question you asked me, that is for sure has to be my answer, because that was such a profound moment for me. Sorry, that was not rapid fire answer at all. And I apologize.
That's okay. I'm looking for an answer. But my last rapid fire question is, how do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as you always knew where he stood. So nobody could ever come to you and say, hey, Keita was like, I wasn't sure where he stood on this issue, etc. I just always wanted to be able to tell you, hey, this is where I stand on this particular issue, even if we disagree. I always want to be straight up, honest, straightforward with people, and let's have that deep conversation.
Right. That's a great way to be remembered.
Right.
So in my rant, as I said, for my audience, has been great. Thank you so much for sharing both how to have these, setting these New Year's resolutions, but more importantly, the framework to actually make them successful. As we started the show, we talked about that only 20% make it and actually keep their resolutions, which is a great stat, by the way. 20% is a very positive number. And why, and the actions that they take to make that difference. And it's some of the techniques you had. So, this has been fantastic. Any final words for our audience before we wrap up?
Final words before you have two options in life. You can serve the future you want, or you can sabotage the future you want. You make a choice every single day. And I want to encourage you to make a choice every single day to serve the future you want and pay for the future you want. Don't pay for a future you don't want.
I love it. That's that's what I think we can take all of that. We can take that into the next year. So Keita Demming, author of Strategy to Action. And thank you so much for being part of the show. And I know people will certainly appreciate your tips as the year progresses for them. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Chris, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope whatever you're working on today, I hope that was a fulfilling experience for you.
Thanks for joining me on Turning the Page. What did you learn from today's episode? If you follow me on LinkedIn, please drop me a comment there. I'd love to chat with you about it over a virtual coffee. Send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can do so at our website. The link's in the show notes. I'm Chris Reynolds, and until next time.